So if you're literally just joined us there, Michael, I'm going to be hosting the session today. We're looking at setting up and applying late payment charges to your customer outstanding balances in Sage 50 accounts. Let's have a look at what we're going to be covering during this session. So we're going to start with a little bit of background, a bit of an introduction to late payment charges. We'll touch on the late payment legislation and also guidance surrounding that. And then what I'm going to do is, I don't want to spend too long discussing the legislation. I'm going to give you some links where you can find out the detail if you do require that. But we're then going to move on to some demonstrations, so looking at how you go about checking that you've got the credit charges control account set up, entering finance rates within the software so that you can apply them a little bit later on during the late payment charge calculation. We'll look at how you go about flagging your customer records, because you will need to tick the box, and there are some restrictions on who you should do that for as well. The credit charges wizard itself, so we'll set up some invoices so they're overdue, and we'll show you how you can work through that credit charges wizard. I'll explain about the calculation, how that works. Really, it uses simple interest as well, so straightforward calculation that you need to apply, so it'll do that automatically for you. And also I'm going to touch on corrections as well, so a little bit in the background. Very easy for me to say you just do this, this and this, but there will be situations where maybe you apply an interest charge in error, or you've gone in too soon and you've set it to the wrong date. So I'm going to show you how you can sort of undo that, as it were, so that you can then essentially apply that late payment charge again. And then just at the end, I'm going to explain more about the additional support, and if there are any outstanding questions, I'll try my best to pick some of those up as well for you. So let's start with a little bit of background to late payment charges and why you might use them in the first place. So obviously late payments can have it can be a significant impact on your cash flow. You don't receive the money into the business when you're expecting it. And to help you encourage your customers to pay on time, and obviously there's the compensation element if they haven't paid on time as well. Way back in, it was 1998, the government introduced the Late Payment of Commercial Debts Interest Act. And it's been updated a couple of times since then. So there was an update in, let me just find my notes again. I can remember the 2 years off the top of my head. So there was an update in 2002 and a further subsequent update in 2013. Now that's in the UK. If you're based in Ireland, there's the European Community's Late Payment on Commercial Transactions Regulation 2012, so around about the same time. If you have a look at both sets of legislation, you'll pretty much see that they're pretty much a mirror image of each other. Now, one of the keywords that I've got, two keywords that I've got selected there and highlighted in bold, is it relates to commercial debt. So it's a business to business, so where you can apply these. It's not, say, to a retail customer, standard consumer. Now, this is assuming that you don't have any other terms and conditions in place to where you've set the precedent for interest that you would apply. So if you haven't got that, then this legislation would apply. And it basically allows you to charge any late payers interest on anything that's overdue once the agreed period of time has passed. So once an invoice has gone beyond the payment terms, so it becomes overdue, and then you can start applying interest to that. Now again, the guidance, etc., that is available, and I've got a couple of links if you have downloaded the handouts, so these links will help. You'll get a lot more information about them, so one for the UK and one for Ireland. So you'll see the sort of the detail of that. You have that available as to, it'll outline sort of rates that you can apply, when you should apply it, what the calculation is, etc. And again, if you look at these, you'll see that the legislation and guidance is virtually identical. The main difference is if you are in the UK, the rate that you can charge under the legislation is based on the Bank of England base rate plus up to 8%. Now, obviously, in recent, probably the last year or so, obviously that Bank of England base rate started going up quite a bit. So these links as well will give you links to where that base rate is listed. So it's got dates on there, base rate, and you can apply the optional up to 8% on top. For Ireland, it's based, rather than Bank of England, it's based around the European Central Bank rate, and again, up to plus 8%. So you've got the links there. Really easy to find that online anyway, if you do need that. Now, I don't want to spend too long on the legislation and the guidance. What I want to do is show you how you would apply that in Sage Accounts itself. So let's say you've got something overdue and you want to start using the credit charges option. How does it actually work? Now, just before I get on to that, I'm going to run a quick poll. So I'll just pop one on your screen and I'll launch that. If you don't mind, if you could give me an answer. So a simple question, do you currently use the credit charges option? So it's the credit charges option within customers that we're looking at today. So just give me a yes or a no. I'm half expecting the vast majority is going to be a no. But if you don't mind choosing an option, we'll see what we get. So I'll just wait till I get a decent percentage of you having voted on that option, and then I'll share the results with you as well, just so you can see a little bit of the background. All right, let's close that poll then. So the majority of you have voted there. So if I should quickly share the results with you, you'll be able to see that small percentage of you, so 13% of you, just over half, are using the credit charges option. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, and about 88% aren't. So hopefully you're just along today to see how it works, how easy it is to apply that interest using the option, and if it is right for you, hopefully you'll be able to then utilize that to just make things that little bit easier. Now, there is no requirement, if you do look at the legislation in depth, and again, you've got the links back on screen, there is no requirement to actually inform your customer in advance that you will apply this, because it is just legislation. So you can apply this as soon as essentially debts become overdue. So let's have a look at how you go about dealing with that in the software. So we're going to run through a series of demonstrations. Again, we've got the link to the Help Center on there. So if you have downloaded the slides, that Help Center link will take you to an article which will almost mirror what I'm about to cover. But again, nice and easy to find should you need it. Right, let me share my screen and we'll start running through a few demos. So the first thing we're going to look at is ensuring that you have a credit charges control account set up. Now, all that is a nominal code that's flagged as the control account, so that when you work through the wizard, it'll basically know which nominal code to post the charges to. Now, to check that, all you're doing is within Sage, and incidentally, the credit charges wizard, it's been around for many, many years, and it's available on all levels of the software as well. So it doesn't matter whether you're on Essentials, on Standard, or the professional level of the software, it works in exactly the same way. So we're just going to go into settings and then down to control accounts, or fourth option from the bottom in this case. And what we're looking for, again, pretty near the bottom of the list here, is credit charges. So by default, if you're using the sort of the standard nominal ledger list, you will have one called credit charges so 4,400. So that should appear in amongst sort of the sales sections of nominal codes, with it being in the 4,000 range. And you just need to make sure if you set up your own nominal code that you've got that one flagged. So I've got the default there, 4,400, I'll just okay that. But you just need to make sure as well that it is being included in your reports. So when you generate the likes of a profit and loss account, is that nominal code being included, which again, if we go to nominal codes, chart of accounts, I've only got one chart of accounts in this company. You might have more than one. If we edit that chart of accounts, and within the sales section that we got selected, you'll see we've got a section. And again, this is the default one. So credit charges for late payments. So that covers the range 4,400 to 4,499. So that's the default. So if you set up your own nominal code, just make sure it's included in a range, or if you don't have a range for it, you could even just set up an individual nominal code for it. So, for instance, if I done 4500, I could put that in as a separate range by itself. So just picking up that one nominal code, but make sure it's included. Next, you need to enter your finance rates themselves. Now you'll do that by going into settings at the top and then into configuration. Just click yes to that prompt. And then you will have a terms tab at the top. And it's this section on the right-hand side that we're going to be looking at. Now, by default, you probably, if you've never used it before, you won't have anything in there. Now, the rates that you charge, so things like the base rate, for instance. So if you're in the UK, that's going to be based around the Bank of England base rate. So those rates, and again, if you're in Ireland, you've got the ECB rate list. You'll have that available via the links that I've already provided you with, to be able to get hold of those. So it's just a case of clicking add, and it will ask you for the date that you want the specific rate to apply from, the base rate, whatever that is, and also the additional rate. So again, within the terms of the legislation and guidance that's available, you can charge up to an additional 8% on top of whatever the base rate is. So you just pop those in, click OK, and it will add them to your list. Now your base rate might change or might not change, but you might even have a one in between where you think, actually, we're changing the additional rate from, say, an additional 5% up to 8%, or you may tweak it. It's up to you. But the base rates, they're linked to from the relevant legislation links I've already provided you with. So it's just a case of keying those in. Obviously, they go way back if you look them up online. So just pop them in there, click OK, and that's them set up. And essentially, you're ready to go. You've done the behind the scenes work then. Next, you need to flag your customer records and enter the payment terms. So I'm just going to take an example of this one here. So within customers, this A1 design services, you can see I've got loads of customers, but I haven't entered any transactions into my accounts yet. So we've all got a zero balance, different credit limits, etc., but they've all got a zero balance. And if we pop into a customer record, we have a look at the credit control tab, there's two things to be aware of. One is the payment due date, or the payment due days, I should say. So I've got mine set to 30. And also the other one at the bottom, can charge credit. So that needs to be ticked. Now bear in mind, the credit charges option is for commercial debts, so business to business transactions. Now, to save you having to do them individually, if you're on the standard level of the software or the professional level, you do have a batch changes option. So just picking on these two here as an example, Bob's Building Supplies and say this Fred Bryant accounts, we'll say that's a business as well. To save me having to go into the accounts individually, what I can do is I can highlight them and then I can access the batch changes option. Now in batch changes, if we go into credit control, we can actually specify payment due days. So as long as it's the same thing, we can specify however many, whatever the payment terms are for those customers I've selected. And also I can select the little checkbox as well, can charge credit. So we then just save it and click yes to save changes to those multiple records. So a little progress bar as it does that, and that's it done. We're set up behind the scenes at that point. Now, if you're on the essentials level of the software, you don't have that batch changes option. So the main option that you've got for entering that information would be to go into the records individually. But in all areas of the software as well, you've also got the opportunity maybe to use the import functionality. So you can actually import that can charge credit and the payment terms directly into a customer record. I'm not going to cover that today though, probably going a bit too far off track. Easiest option, probably just to mention at this stage that you can do them manually. Right, any questions so far? So just again, just to recap on that little bit that we've just done there, it's within each individual customer record, it's on the credit control tab, and it's this payment due days, 30 in my case, and ticking the box can charge credit. Now this little tick box here, this is not date sensitive, so it's not going to say, right, you can't charge credit because it wasn't switched on at the time. It's just the fact it is switched on. When we come to run through the wizard, it will recognize that and therefore allow you to charge credit. But do remember, it's for commercial transactions only. Right, what we'll do next then, as no questions have come through just at that point, I'm going to quickly enter a couple of transactions. Now I'll just do them as a batch invoice for the sake of argument. So we'll do one here just for that A1 design. And obviously I want it to be overdue. So what I'll do first of all is I'm just going to say they were invoiced on the 1st of the month. Now as I tab out of that, you'll see it does bring through the payment terms from the account. So the payment due days, it's adding that 30 days on. Now let's say I'd overridden that at some point. It's the 20th today, so let's make it overdue. We'll just say this invoice was due on the 16th of this month. It is 2023 as well. I'll say it's invoice 123. Do it to a sales nominal code, and I'll just say sales. And we'll pop an amount in as well. So we'll say £1,000. Say I've charged VAT using the standard rate of VAT in the UK at 20%, so £200 VAT. I'll do another one as well. I'll do this one for ABS garages. Again, I'll just use the 1st of the month, and you'll see that one, it picks up as the 31st of July. So we'll say that was 124, and we'll just mirror the information. So I'll just press F6 to copy the information down, and we'll say that's it done. We'll just save those two transactions. So essentially we're going to have one transaction which is overdue and this one here which isn't. So we'll just save them both. So we got the two outstanding balances on the accounts at this point. Now the next thing to look at is the actual wizard itself. So the credit charges wizard. Now I did mention that credit charges, which we've got this little icon for at the top of the screen there. So it is available on all levels of the software. If you don't have that available to you, then it's going to be down to either your access levels or you've switched the option off, you've hidden it from your toolbar at the top, which is, I wouldn't say common, but it's a kind of thing that catches people out. So it's either, if you wanted to use this, you would need to get that option enabled, credit charges at the top. So whoever logs in as manager or as an admin user would need to enable that against your user logon. If it's an option that's just hidden, so what do I mean by that? So if you've been on my webinars before, you'll know I always demonstrate this one, where if you right click anywhere on the toolbar at the top, it will give you a menu. And on here, you can pick and choose which options you want to show and hide. So for instance, if we don't use the go cardless integration where, for instance, where go cardless is to do with direct debits, if we don't use those options, we might just switch them off just to try and declutter the toolbar. So I'll switch an option off. Let's switch some of the other options off. So I just keep right clicking and then I can switch those options off. So credit charges could have been switched off as well. So if we find it on the list, there it is. If I switch it off, you'll see it's hidden from the list at the top. So again, if it's not there and you think you've got full access to the software, just right click, look for it on the list and switch it on so it's there at the top there at that point. If you wanted to access that manually as well from within the customers area, if you press your Alt key, you'll get these sort of codes, I suppose these hot codes that appear next to each of the options. So the idea with pressing Alt to switch those on. So if I press Alt again, it switches them off. But if I press Alt, you see that little code, and then if I press CC, it's going to take me into that credit charges option. Just do that one again for you, just in case you're not that familiar with it. So I press Alt key, it switches them on. And then let's say I want to go to batch invoice. So you can see here, batch invoice BI. So I just Alt, switches them on, and then just BI, and it takes me into that screen. If you know those, it can be a little bit quicker if you're much more keyboard based when you're using the software. Excuse me. Anyway, we want to go into credit charges at this stage. So just click the option at the top and it brings up this credit charges wizard. Now it gives you a few tips at this stage. So it tells you it's going to guide you through that process of applying credit charges to overdue outstanding transactions. And it does advise as well, before running the option, ensure that you've first of all allocated any credit notes against outstanding invoices. What it's going to look for when you run through the wizard is anything that's overdue. Now, if you've got an invoice, let's just say for £100 that was dated, let's say the 1st of May, and you've subsequently raised a credit note for it, but you haven't allocated them together, it would mean that the invoice is essentially, looking at that individual transaction, it would be flagged as being overdue. So then it would be pulled through onto the wizard, and that's possibly one of the reasons I want to cover corrections as well a little bit later on. So just in case you've applied a credit charge to an account in error. So make sure you've tidied things up. So if you have an outstanding invoice with an equal outstanding credit note, make sure they're matched, they're allocated together. Also check to see that your finance rates are correct. So are they up to date? Obviously, base rate, certainly at Bank of England, the base rates changed quite a bit, even in just in the last 6 months, it's changed quite a bit. For the European Central Bank, you find that changes twice per year. Can't remember the exact dates now, but it changes on the same 2 dates each year. So again, you would find that the base rate that you need to apply from the links I've provided. It does prompt you to take a backup at this stage as well. So if you take a backup and you do something in error, you can always undo that. You can sort of undo it manually anyway. But if you apply finance charges to lots of records at the same time and you've made a mistake, then easiest way to undo that is by restoring the backup that you take at this point. So I would always encourage you, just at this stage, take that backup. Anyway, we're going to skip past the backup. So we'll click next. Choose my date. So we'll just use today's date. You can specify a department as well if required. And you can choose whether or not to include disputed items. Now that's up for you to decide that. So if you've got an invoice and it's, let's just say that full invoice is disputed, do you want it to pull that through or not? Yes, it may be overdue, but the reason what's the reason behind that with it being disputed? is it the faulty goods, and therefore you don't want to apply late payment charges just at this point? Do you want to include them or not? Again, disputed items, you don't have that flag on the essentials level of the software, so it wouldn't be relevant to yourselves if you're on the essentials level. I would normally say, and I've never had many queries on the credit charges wizard, that most people would not tick that box. But again, it's up to you to decide that. So pop in your date, department, and whether or not you want to include disputed items. So that's step 1 and step 2. And then we click next. Next, it will pull through the records, so your customer accounts. Which ones do you want to apply the credit charge to? So I'm just going to choose that first one, A1 Design Services. Obviously, I could, if you were in a position to do so, you might just select them all and say, right, I want to apply credit charges to everything that's overdue. Just do it all in one go. But we'll just do the one for the time being, so you can see that. So A1 Design Services, I click next. It lists the overdue transaction. So I'll select the one I want to apply the late payment charge to. I'll click next. And it tells us charges will be applied for the following transactions, so the ones I'd basically selected at that point. So that's fine. And then I click post, and it'll tell me. Now I can print a summary of this, and I can also exit without printing that summary. So it's telling me for transaction number 1. So remember, I started with nothing. I've only entered those 2 batch invoices so far. So for that first one, credit charges for 4 days at 13%. So if you're paying attention when you looked at my finance rates, it was the current base rate. So in the UK, that's 5% currently. And then I've got my 8%, the optional 8% on top, so 13%. I'll come more back to the calculation in a moment. But you can see it's 4 days overdue. So it's going to apply interest at 13%. So I'll just exit that. I've got that summary. So I'll just close out of that. And you can see that the balance has increased at that point. Now, if we pop into, just in case you were wondering as well why my account is in red, it's because actually I've got a higher balance than what the credit limit was. But if I pop into transactions, you can see what the software's actually done. It's posted an additional batch invoice. It doesn't add that to the invoices list because there's not a requirement under the legislation, whether the UK legislation or the Irish legislation. There's not a requirement to send an invoice out for that late payment or for the interest charged on it. So it gives you the full sort of in the details. It'll say credit charges for 4 days at 13%, so it includes the rate. It's obviously got your date on there, the posted date, due on. Just going to essentially put it all 3 dates to be the same, and it's going to show you the amount as well. And obviously it's going to go, in this case, it's picked up T9. So that's the basics of applying it. Now, what I'll also do is if I highlight this transaction, I just want to touch on the corrections option a little bit. We'll run through that wizard again in just a moment and show you why maybe transactions don't appear. So we'll just pick on this transaction, this first one that we've just applied the interest to. So I want to show you what's happened almost in the background. So if I click edit, and what we've now got is we've got this date recorded. So second box down, upper right, it tells me the last charge against this was on the 20th of this, up to and including the 20th of the 7th, 2023. Now, if needed, And I say if needed because you've always got that backup to revert back to if needed as well. But if needed, if you've done the wrong thing and you think, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I've done it up to the wrong date, potentially what we could do is amend that date. So, or strip it out. If we've not applied interest to this transaction before, we could knock that one out. So we'll just leave it blank, save the changes. And then what we'd also want to do at that point is delete this transaction that had been posted to the account for the interest. It means that we could then, essentially we've manually undone what we've done. Now it also uses that date. So this one, if we go back to edit the transaction, it uses this last charge date. So if we, let's say we now get to the end of the month, we think, right, we're going to apply interest charges again because this, they're still outstanding. So we might do this on a regular basis. So it will then work out then again, let's say we get to the end of the month, we'll say, right, well, actually, there's another 11 days it's being outstanding for. So we want to charge interest for that. So it'll refer to this and it will work out the difference days wise for the purpose of the calculation. So it knows what it needs to, essentially what it needs to charge. Hope that makes sense. Chances are you probably never need to amend that date, but that's what it's doing sort of behind the scenes when it's applying that credit charge. So let's just close out of that one. Right, if we pop back to customers for a moment, and again, if I just highlight this one and we'll run through credit charges again. So I'll just quickly run through that wizard again. I'll just say up to today's date. Now I'll choose that ABS garages. Now remember, this one is not overdue yet. So I click next, there's nothing listed. So it'll only pull through what's overdue. Other thing to be aware of as well, now this one I've got flagged for being able to charge credit, but let's put an invoice on against this one. Again, I'll backdate it to the first, let's say the first day of this month. And I'll also amend the due date just so it is overdue. So I'll override what it calculates. We'll just say £1,000 for that one as well. Save it. So again, we'd be in a similar position to the one that we had up here. But what I'll quickly do is I'm going to go in and into credit control. We'll take that tick out, save it. And then we'll just try and go through that wizard again. So you'll see this Bob's Building Supplies is not listed on this list. So if you come to this point in the wizard and you think, well, why are none of my customers listed, or the one I'm looking for, why is that not listed? It's all to do with that can charge credit. So it's not going to pull through accounts, or if it's more of a retail customer, standard consumer, then because the legislation doesn't apply to that, then it's not going to let you pull it through and accidentally apply those interest charges. But in this instance, what we'll do, we'll just go back into the record, back into credit control, tick the box to say can charge credit, save it. And then when I go through that credit charges wizard again, accept all the defaults, you'll see Bob's Building Supplies, which is now there because I've ticked that box. It's got it listed. Again, you've got the summary. I'll just exit at that point. And in this case, it's calculated 9 days at 13%. And that's it done. Right, Adina, I'll pick up your question in just a moment. So Adina's just asking about what documentation do you provide your customer with for the late charges. I'll come back to that one in a moment. Right, final thing I wanted to quickly discuss with you is just the brief calculation, just in case anyone wants to, again, maybe know a bit more in depth about what's happening. So your late payment calculation is just basically the gross outstanding amount. So that includes VAT. So it's the gross outstanding amount. That is multiplied by essentially your interest rate, so which is the base rate plus your optional up to 8%. That's obviously divided by 100 to give you the relevant rate, multiplied by the number of days overdue, and it'll divide that by 365, so that essentially you're applying a daily rate, as it were. So as I say, it uses simple interest. It doesn't apply interest on the interest, so it's not a compound interest. It's simple interest that it uses according to the legislation. So it's not going to snowball. So that's the basic calculation. Again, if you've downloaded the information that's available within our help center, it'll have this on there as well. So coming back to Adina's question, Adina's just asking, what documentation, if any, do you need to provide your customers with for the late charges? So as I mentioned earlier, there's according to the legislation, you don't have to inform your customer in advance that you will be applying late payment charges because it is legislation. You can obviously include it within your terms and conditions if required. So obviously you should only apply this late payment charge if there are no other agreed terms in place with regard to what interest or charges would be added for late payment. Now, as far as sending out documentation about the late payment, as it were, you don't need to obviously send any invoice for this. All we normally recommend is that you would maybe resend a statement, and it would document that one. So if we just highlight this customer as an example, and I go into statements, we'll just choose a basic statement. So let's choose, I'll just choose that one as an example. So it's a grouped and outstanding items only statement. So let's just preview that one. Say again, I want to run it up to today's date. And then obviously that statement is going to include that additional credit charge. So again, keeping them informed about what's outstanding. Now, even then, I don't think if you read the legislation and the guidelines that you'll find that there's it's not set in stone that you need to follow these steps, i.e. you need to give them a call, you need to write them a letter, or you need to write them an email. Obviously, the legislation is there and you can apply that. But obviously sending out a statement, if anyone is sending statements, if you still print them out and post them or do hand deliver them, for instance, if you've not come across it so far or you're not doing it so far, sending them via email, pretty easy. Particularly if you work with Outlook as well, really easy. And we've got some recorded webinars on how you go about doing that. If you want to include things like your terms, just saying like late payment charges would be applied. If you want to include text like that on your invoices, you could amend your invoice layout and add a bit of text on there. Just, again, keep them informed. Or if you're sending via email, that might be in a separate document that you attach to the emailed invoice. So the number of options for you. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into the credit charges option. But great article within the Help Center should you need it. Right, now if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in there now. I'll try and pick those up as best I can. Remember that you will receive an email later today containing links so that you can register for future webinars and so that you can watch recordings. And there will be a recording of this one, this specific session that will be linked on that follow-up email as well. So if you need a bit of a recap, you'll have that available. You get that round about, I think it's around about 2 hours time for today's email. We've got that scheduled for. So watch out for that one. But if you've got any questions, please start popping them in there now. I'll try my best to pick them up. If anyone's leaving just at this stage as well, just to quickly mention, there'll be a little survey pop up as you leave the session today. If you could take a minute just to pop some thoughts and feedback on there. Any ideas you'd like to share with us, maybe for future webinars, do let us know. If you could take a minute to do that, greatly appreciate it. To give you an idea of what we've got coming up over the next couple of weeks, this may be one that really interests you as well if you are going to start applying late payment charges, and it's to do with the account status option. So essentially flagging an account where you might change the status so that it's on hold. So because you've got something overdue, you might want to essentially place the account on hold so that no additional invoices can be or orders can be placed against it. So there are a number of options for you. Account status, a brand new topic. We've never covered that one before. We're covering bank reconciliation, budgets we've got coming up, the business dashboard, user management, VAT verification settings. Starting next week as well, we'll be covering the improved bank feeds option in version 29.2. So 29.2 isn't available just yet, but it should be with us soon. But one of the big changes is the improved bank feeds experience. So if you've never used bank feeds before and you want to see what it's all about, come along for that one. If you have used it, come along and you'll see the changes that we've made based on your feedback. So we always get lots of feedback about bank feeds. That's something that hasn't changed for quite some time, so it's probably due a bit of an overhaul. So again, the way that you match transactions, download transactions, etc., post any missing transactions, much easier in what will be the new and improved bank feeds when version 29.2 is released. So if you want to join us for one of those demonstrations, there's a number of dates and times available starting from next week. Again, the link will be included on your follow-up email. Again, any questions, if you want to pop them in there. I don't have any outstanding at the moment. So I'll just give that another 30 seconds or so just to see if anyone is typing in those last minute questions. Remember, if you think of anything afterwards, obviously there's loads of information available in our help centre. And of course, our support team is on hand to help as well if required. Quick question from Karen there, just going back to the batch changes. Let me just show you that one again there, Karen. So if I just go back to my desktop, I'll show you what I did just to flag multiple accounts. So let's say I had these ones as an example, these two here, which were, let's say they were businesses, and I want to flag them so that I can charge credit or want to set maybe payment terms against those accounts simultaneously. I just select them on the list, and then at the top I've got a batch changes option. You may find that some of your options are grouped together. So if I just reset my toolbar to what we were looking at earlier, if I go back to right click and then use defaults, you'll see I no longer have batch changes listed at the top. Instead, it's grouped on the new edit option. So I click on the lower part of that. I've got batch changes. Maybe that's why yours is missing as well. But just going back to batch changes, when I've got multiple accounts selected and I go into batch changes, some of the fields will be grayed out, but some of them won't. And fortunately for us, on the credit control, we can specify the payment due days. So we'll say 30. And also, I want to flag those two records to say I can charge credit against them. They're a commercial, obviously it's going to be commercial transactions between ourselves and them. So I can charge credit if it goes overdue. So I'll tick the box, click save. Prompts you've chosen to make changes to multiple records. Do you want to save the changes? Yes to that. So obviously, if you selected loads, progress bar is going to take just that little bit longer, but it will apply those changes for you. Hope that makes sense. Right, that was the only question I had there, so thank you for that one, Karen. Any other questions? If you think of anything, do let us know. Get in touch. I remember there's loads of information in the Help Centre should you need it. Right, Okay, I think we were just about ready to end the webinar at that point. So once again, many thanks for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it and it's given you maybe some food for thought. I'm sure, obviously, the majority of you said you weren't using that option. If you do start using it, let me know how you get on. Always love to hear the little bits of feedback on it. Again, if you think of any changes you'd like to see as well, get involved. You can submit your ideas via the roadmap, which you can do access directly from within your software. Once again, the little survey will pop up as you leave today's session. If you can take a minute just to complete that, it'd be greatly appreciated. We love reading those comments just to see if we hit the mark or not. And your follow-up email should be with you later on this afternoon. So many thanks, take care, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you on some other webinars soon.